After last month's $50 billion deal to supply LNG to China from the Gorgon gas field project, it appears that it's still business as usual between Australia and China. Tensions between Australia and China have been strained to say the least after the arrest of 4 Rio Tinto executives in China, including Australian Stern Hu, and prickly negotiations over iron ore prices. One man better placed than most to talk about doing business in China is Clinton Dines. For the past 21 years, he's been the most senior executive in China for BHP and, after the merger, BHP Billiton. Now retired from the miner, he's notched up more than 30 years' experience working with the Chinese and agreed to this rare interview with our regular presenter, Ali Moore, in Beijing.
Clinton Dines, welcome to the program.
Thanks.
This may sound somewhat counterintuitive, but is it in fact more difficult doing business in China now than it was, say, 2 decades ago?
No, it's not more difficult, but the context has changed a lot. There's a lot more people here doing business. There's a lot more business being done. China's a much more developed commercial environment, and there's a huge amount more activity. Also, for foreigners doing business in China, foreigners are more familiar now, have learned a lot more lessons here, and their Chinese counterparts have learned a lot more lessons about doing business with foreigners. So to that extent, there's a great deal more familiarity. But a lot of things really haven't changed. The nature of the transaction, the nature of the negotiation in China, etc., those things are more culturally based. The haggling and the market kind of style of things. And also, China has a legacy, I guess, in terms of the way business is done, the way relationships are managed, etc., and also aspects that we refer to as rule of law type aspects, or the way rules are managed, rules are enforced, the way contracts can be enforced, etc. There's still China's in a transition. You're still in a process of maturation of the environment, and there's still a fair way to go, I think, before you can sort of compare it with the Western world or the Anglo-Saxon type models.
A business advisor in Beijing said to me that you only know as a Western business person that you've stepped over the line or sailed too close to the wind when you get caught. Is that a fair assessment?
I think you should know yourself.
But are the rules that clear that you would know?
There's plenty of rules around, and you can get a lot of rules to read, you can get a lot of legal advice, etc. So the rules are relatively clear enough. You've got to remember that China has legislated an incredible amount in the last 30 years. Back in 1979-80, when the whole opening process and the reform process started, you only had 4 laws on the books, I think. I'm not sure what the latest count is, but I think it's up towards 20,000 laws and associated regulations and all that sort of stuff.
But that obviously doesn't make it any easier, does it?
It makes it more complex in many ways, but the other side of it is that the rules are there, but there's been so many rules coming so fast that it's hard for everyone to keep up exactly what's there. And you have a culture that hasn't had rules before coming to terms with those rules. And also you have an entire bureaucratic apparatus, an entire legal and court apparatus, etc., all having to build capacity to keep up with interpreting those rules, a bureaucratic apparatus doing the same thing. So it takes time. Again, it's a maturation process, it's a transition. And in China, of course, it's massive. It's a big country with a lot of people, a lot going on, a huge economy. So, I think we have a tendency perhaps to expect a lot from them. And the way I tend to look at it is, rather than comparing China now with the United States or Australia or Europe or something like that, I tend to compare China with where China used to be. And obviously there's dramatic, measurable progress on many, many fronts. Far from perfect, but it's getting there.
But you've been here a long time, and you obviously see a lot of people doing business here. When it comes to issues such as governance issues, do you see a lot of people sailing close to the wind, thinking, well, maybe they're doing it, why can't I?
Yeah, that I think can be a trap. China is a difficult environment to operate in. It's a hostile environment. When you're fresh off the aeroplane and you're thinking in terms of, wow, 1 billion people, the old Procter & Gamble, 2 billion armpits opportunity in the market sort of thing. So you do tend to think, wow, there's a big opportunity. And then after you've been here for a while, you start getting frustrated with lack of progress. Frustration with lack of progress can be the thing that leads you to be tempted towards shortcuts. And I see that happen time and time and time again with many, many companies while they come up their learning curve.
Does that mean shortcut equal bribery?
Oh, there's all sorts of ways to think about shortcuts in terms of how you do it. Sometimes it's not bribery, it's not that blatant. Sometimes it's just the way people cut corners when they're building a building, the way they ignore certain rules because they find out that they can get away with it and all that sort of stuff. So there's a lot of different ways, but it's the frustration of not making forward progress that leads people to be willing to accept the temptation towards a shortcut. And that's why I say it's up to you. You know, I've been here a very long time. I've run businesses in many different things. I've run businesses in, you know, transportation and logistics in the 1980s. Now, you know, that's an area where there's a huge amount of loopholes and gaps and things like that, and temptations all over the place. And in my experience, you can run a business very straightforward and very cleanly, but it starts with you yourself. It starts with your values and you having a very clear view of what is black and what is white, and running your organisation and coaching and mentoring your people like that and behaving that way.
Well, let's get to I guess, the heart of what's been the biggest issue in your industry, in the iron and steel sector. You know Stern Hu. Mm-hmm. Were you surprised by what happened?
Yes, of course. It's a very, very dramatic thing to happen. It's very surprising and shocking in many ways. And I think the thing from my perspective is that there's a lot of emotion around things like the iron ore price negotiations, and that emotion fed into this particular incident. And I think the important thing that we've all got to do now is let that emotion come out of the situation, and the process will take its course.
Those iron and steel price negotiations, you had 21 years of them. For the first time this year, they've not been finalised. No deal has been done with the very big miners. What's changed? What's different this year?
I think the change was already underway. You've had a huge amount of pressure on the process, on the benchmark negotiation for the last few years, and there's a transition in place away from the way it was done. Clearly, the way that price negotiation took place for many years is not suitable to the current situation, the current market dynamic, the emergence of China as a large buyer, etc.
But aren't there other ways of China perhaps getting to the point of a new pricing arrangement than what you currently have, which is buying on the spot price at highly inflated prices? Clearly
it's evolving. Clearly the situation is evolving. Both sides are looking very hard at that, and both sides have a view about where they would like the situation to go. But clearly we're not going to go back to the way it was, and it's a matter of how long it takes for everyone to come to an agreement about the way it should go in the future. But it's in transition, it is evolving.
Does it indicate a more aggressive China, a bigger attempt by China to try and control what has been a looser relationship between the mills and the producers?
I don't know that there's so much aggression. I think it's just a natural impulse that China is a large buyer. The Chinese mills are active in the market. They are in a very fast-growing economy. They need to sell a lot of steel, so they need a lot of iron ore. It's relatively that simple. And because of that, they're concerned about security of supply, and they're concerned about the way that supply is priced. But you also have to remember, China is a relative newcomer to global commodities. And as a result, and when China comes in and on the scale that they've come in, that's had a huge impact on markets. I think everyone has to come to terms with that, both the suppliers and the Chinese as buyers. And gradually the situation will mature and evolve to something that's a little more comfortable and more comfortable equilibrium for everybody.
When you sit in on those negotiations, how easy is it to get the information you need to negotiate appropriately? Is it right that a couple of years ago an employee of China Iron and Steel was actually imprisoned for running a side business of selling industry statistics, which were the very statistics that people who wanted to do these sorts of negotiations would need?
No, it's easy enough to be very correct about how you gather information in China. A lot of people do a lot of analysis on China. China's a very important economy in a lot of industries in a lot of the world. So many companies spend a lot of time and effort gathering information very appropriately, very legally, and there are a lot of good sources of information. So it's a matter of being very diligent about how you gather information and looking at the public sources of information and working hard to do it. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes diligence to gather information. But if you're doing big business, you're willing to spend that money and do that effort in order to have a good picture of your customers, understand their customers and the market that you're dealing with. And it's appropriate that you do so.
Clinton Dines, many thanks for talking to us.
Thanks, Ali.